Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And we always have listeners and viewers literally from all around the world. It's very nice to see you. I'm your host today, Marc de Swan-Arons, one of the founders of the Institute for Real Growth. And I'm very, very happy to welcome a friend and inspiring leader, Kees Kruythoff. Kees, nice to see you. I'm going to tell you a
Fantastic.
little bit about Kees before I formally ask him to say hello. Kees is somebody that I literally have known for over 25 years and seen move from leadership role to leadership role. And even when they were very junior, they were still leadership roles, the way that Kees took the role. And always been incredibly impressed with his ability to rally troops around him, rally people that have a cause, have a shared cause, whether it's a new production line for a margarine or a new e-commerce company. We'll talk about that later. But he has this natural ability to inspire people with a vision and then to lead very much from the front. And Kees did that as an entrepreneur at Unilever for I think it was 27 years or something, but a long
Yeah.
time, and then made the massive move to Live Kindly, which we are going to talk about because it's one of the most exciting new ventures that I've heard about. But really demonstrating that the entrepreneur can be the entrepreneur. Kees, with that intro, welcome, and where are you and how are you?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And what a great way to be together. And as you say, 25 years we have been together on this journey. And like what you said in the introduction about me, that is the same what I want to say about you, because every step what you do, you inspire and you create and you craft from nothing something always unique and inspiring. So thank you for continuing your personal growth journey and your inspiration into the world. And again, what you have created now is so relevant because ultimately, this is what we're going to talk about, but humanizing growth is super relevant. So where am I? I am, after 20 years having lived all around the world, in all continents around the world, from the Netherlands to South Africa, Singapore, China, back to South Africa, Brazil, New York, London. Finally, after 20 years, I am back home here in the Netherlands, very close to the sea, in a little place called Noordwijk. And, I think COVID does many things, but one of the things that it does, it gets you all the way back into the Maslow pyramid, and that is to be close, to be home, to be with friends and family close home. So that is where I physically am. How am I? I am in a state of unbelievable excitement. I'm also in a state of big questions, and for the first time, not really knowing where this journey really takes the next curves and the next step ups. And therefore, how am I? I am probably in the most exciting phase of my life. I see it as the first 50 years are just being behind me, and now I'm in the second half of my journey. And this time I will take everything what is in my backpack as my experience, expertise, and a bit of a network forward into the second phase of my life. And that will be even more exciting than the first phase and the first half of my life. You're on mute, Mark.
I must have touched the button. I said that it's fantastic to hear that, and we're going to talk about that journey, and we're going to talk about what's ahead. But it's funny, listening to you reminds me. There's there are many books, but I remember reading this book about the cycles of life. The Levensloop der Mens is the Dutch title, and he basically said that you were sort of experimenting in your 20s, and then in your 30s you locked down on something. You zoom in on a specialism that you are really good at, and at 40 you were at your peak and you were driving it. And I honestly believe that is at least 50 now. Everything has just shifted, and your journey definitely demonstrates that we keep learning far into our 40s, and hopefully actually forever. Hey, listen, before we actually get to the specifics of it, um, You talk about excitement and learning and the journey and not quite knowing what is around. And when you don't know what's around the corner or where the next curve or step up is, you need to be able to rely on a purpose. You need to have a compass that actually gives you guidance in unexpected moments. And so I want to start there. I mean, do you have a purpose? When did that become clear, and how has it played a role as you navigated all those curves?
Yeah, I have a very clearly defined purpose. And, in the different phases of my life, it has sharpened further. But it all starts with my mother. And, my mother has always taught me is that, as a good Calvinistic mother, actually, don't waste your talents and put your talents at service to society. And the notion is that, this how you can always in everything what you do, and whether that is in your family life, in your social life, in your work life, in your sports life, in any part of where you are active, is to be able to get to your full potential is something which is at the core of of my upbringing. And then I had the pleasure to have a personal coach, and that is Bill George. And Bill George is obviously somebody who created an incredible purposeful organization as his time as the CEO for Medtronic. He teaches at Harvard now, and I had the pleasure to have him as my personal coach. And so the whole thing about your true north and how can you make sure that you're always, keeping your true north at the North Star, and you act in line with that, whatever comes on the journey. And so my purpose is that I want to go from being always the youngest of the old generation. I want to become the oldest of the next generation. And I want to inspire the generation in terms of what real purposeful business is all around. And I want to give back there where, my soul is most connected. And that is in the diversity of the world, and especially in Africa. And by doing that, I want to put all of my expertise, experience, and network at play to what my mother says, put my talents at service to society.
So let's go to a pivotal moment in your life, at least in your career. Because it's funny, I actually thought of you this week. Probably I was thinking of you all the time because I knew we were going to be talking, but it was subliminal. And I was having a conversation with a friend, an NYU professor. NYU is a partner of the Institute for Real Growth. And they have a new professor, a professor of serendipity. And the moment I heard that position had been created, I said, I want to meet this guy. And he's a young, enthusiastic German professor, Christian Busch. And I have something very strong with serendipity. My grandfather said it was his favorite word because it explained his life. I recognize that. But I thought of you in serendipity because one of the themes that Christian Busch actually talks about is that things happen around us all the time. That's a fact, you can't change it. But what's different about serendipitous people is two things. One, they recognize the things that are happening around them. And two, they act on them. And actually, he adds a third, they actually accelerate them. They try and emphasize them. And he said, the way you do that is by talking to your sister and your brother's friends about what you want to do. Now back to your pivotal moment. You took a step back out of Unilever after a very big decision, of course. And you wrote a letter, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, to I think everybody you knew closely. I got it too, and it was around Christmas, so it was a moment that you were reflecting, but it was also a moment that everyone was reflecting, and it landed very well because in it, you spoke of your purpose, but you also spoke about all the things that you were thinking about and that you were open to. And according to Christian Busch, that would be an invitation for ideas. That would be a opening up yourself to serendipitous moments. Can you talk a little bit about that important moment and also what you recognize from what I just said?
Yeah, for sure. And, I strongly believe as well is that, there are so many forces at work, and serendipity is an absolute critical one. And I love the fact is this notion about once you recognize it, it is for you and your responsibility to accelerate it. So the story is that, on the 28th of November 2018, actually the chairman of Unilever at that time, Marijn Dekkers, he gave me this phone call and he said, I have bad news for you. You will not become the next CEO of Unilever. And 27 years, I had always in my mind, and this was very strange, when I started working in 1993, in February 1993, I walked into that office in Unilever in the Netherlands, and I just said to myself, and actually I was very open always on it, also to others, I want to become, and I will become the CEO of this company. And it was obviously, thinking back, it was quite ludicrous. But anyway, that was who I am and what I said. So 27 years later, having become so close to something which I aspire deeply. I love Unilever as a business. I think it's one of the most unbelievable businesses and people and history, and making the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan into 180 countries and 2.5 billion people every day. It's just an unbelievable organization, and being so absolutely passionate about it, and then getting that phone call obviously was a big disappointment. And so I actually remembers that I was having dinner with my beautiful wife, with Sabine, and we were sitting at the Shard in London, overlooking actually the Unilever head office. And I came back after this phone call to her, and I said, bad news. And we said, just on this day next year, we will sit together and we will decide then what to do. And so what I did first is 6 months of, a time of, helping Alan to get into his role, and handing over my job to actually talking about Serendipity to my very best friend, Peter ter Kulve, who is now the president of home care at Unilever. And then, I created my own space, 6 months of sabbatical. And I first traveled with my 5 daughters, one by one, to a location of their choice, and then with Sabine. And I did one thing, which basically, with hindsight, really worked well, because then many people came and say, would you be interested in? And then all kinds of very diverse things came. And I did one thing, and I said to all of them, I will push all the opportunities all the way until the 28th of November, and then I will decide again. And to your point, Mark, on serendipity, so many things then started to move into pieces, which basically started to come to me. And one of this was actually at the moment where Roger Lienhard, he came to me and he started to talk about Live Kindly Collective and plant-based food, and suddenly all these things just came together because I had very clear assumptions and criteria for the next step, and that was the day that I decided. And you're absolutely right. In the reflection, I love to write at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year a letter, and I did it again this year in terms of what has all happened. And the moment of reflection was there, and it was all about serendipity coming together and starting the Live Kindly Collective.
No, fantastic. So indeed, it's beautiful how the pieces come together, but it took you to act on them, and that's I think the overriding lesson here. Look, we're in a very different world now than the moment you wrote that letter. We're at a year in, and some places the light is clearly at the end of the tunnel, we think. Other places it doesn't feel like that at all, and it actually feels like we're falling into a third wave. Before we actually go and talk about what Live Kindly is trying to do, I'd like to just have your view on what's happened over the last year. What have you seen? What do you think was beautiful that's happened? What are the things that you think will stay with us forever? And just what's the business world we're now all part of? What's the actually not just the business world, the world?
Yeah, so of course, unprecedented times, and we all first go and say, what happens into a crisis, as we just already said. Maslow drives everybody to the management of the crisis, and that is being close to families and making sure that the safety is there. And then once that's the case, everybody starts to say, what is then the safety, and therefore, taking care of companies. And making sure is that the health crisis did not become either a food crisis or other unintended further consequence crises. I do believe as well is that there are indeed in the pain of the pandemic that there are also absolute learnings and elements which the world will actually take forward into its next phase of its development. And obviously, the consciousness of the world has increased throughout the pandemic. And, one of the elements is that viruses is actually, in almost all of the cases, a crisis coming from animal and humans in terms of the food system. At the same time, the consciousness in the world also increased when we saw is that the swans were back in the canals in Venice, and we started to feel that the Mother Earth could start to breathe again a little bit. And so I think it's in terms of some of the real learnings out of the pandemic is this notion about the reflection of pause and the power of the pause. I think is absolutely part of this. The second part of this is that all the trends which were already there, just totally accelerated. Look at the digitization of the world. And, imagine if this would have happened 25 years ago, if we have now a 3.5% decrease in our GDP, it would have been disastrous if we not have the digitization. And that acceleration obviously helped. And it helped indeed in all of the elements. And if we start to talk about, truly climate change and inequality being the biggest issues to solve for us as leaders in our phase of our contribution to society, I think this has helped us enormously in terms of mindset, leadership shifts. And, of course, if you look at the number of countries who have now said net positive, whether it is in China or in Japan or in Europe, now luckily the US getting back into that group of leaders as countries. And so I do believe is that this power of the pause, the reflection, and then, going forward actually helps us. I sometimes have said is that, somebody has sent us all into our rooms as naughty children, as parents send naughty children back into their rooms, and they just need to reflect on what they have done wrong. And when you are actually back calm and reflective, you can get out of your room. And so I think that is a thought that we are almost ready to go back and make sure is that we have learned from it and that we go not back into the old, but we rejuvenate into the next.
That's so interesting because if you look at the world around, and you've talked a little bit about sort of the forces for change, the pause. I hadn't really heard of the power of the pause. I love that expression. I want to say to everybody that's listening and viewing us, there's a chat and you can add questions and we will pick them up as we see appropriate. You can also just comment, like somebody just said that we're playing bullshit bingo in terms of buzzwords. Apparently that's the case. Well, guess what? It might be important things that are happening. But one of the things that happened this week that excited me in that realm was that contrary to just sort of the chairman of BlackRock demanding higher transparency around the social and human aspects of companies, the SEC acting chair actually put out a document with requests for comments, which is their first step of really changing things in the reporting world. Well, in terms of consumer expectations, because now we're getting to the world which Live Kindly is stepping into, what do you think there has changed in the way that they look at companies, what they demand of companies?
Yeah, the moment is that I stepped into and really becoming a founder and entrepreneur and starting literally from nothing, absolutely nothing, where we said, we want to build a company which is the global preeminent plant-based food company with the mission to make plant-based eating and plant-based living the new norm. When you start that, the first thing is obviously around, where do you get capital from? And, of course, the logic is that if you have an attractive market, if you have an innovative model, and if you have a superior team, is that money will shift. But what was really interesting is that within 12 months, is that we have fundraised over $500 million. And, when you think about that, the size of that capital, but also, all about conscious capitalism. It's really totally mission aligned. And so this the notion about how the capital starts to shift into, areas of business as a force for good was, at least in our experience in the last 12 months, was absolutely amazing. So I think we are really about seeing this shift. The ESG investment starts to still be an ESG investment versus, all the investment needs to shift into where purpose and performance are actually one and the same thing. What I do believe is that, we have seen a systemic shift over the last sort of 3 to 5 years with an acceleration in the last 12 months. And now capital actually is starting to shift into a force for good.
Yeah, so that's the capital markets. Look, we see the logo behind you. You've referred to it a few times already, but would you just do the proper introduction? What is Live Kindly? Where does it come from? I know it's the name says collective. I think everybody wants to know a little bit more.
Yeah. So, when we started this, and Roger Lienhard came to me, and he is actually a serial entrepreneur, as a Swiss guy, and he made lots of money in his early phase of his career, starting businesses and then selling it. And he had a sabbatical, and in that sabbatical, he had the pivotal moment that he said, I really want to help. And the biggest way I can do is actually to take the animal out of the food system. And so, he started with a venture capital company called Blue Horizon. And that, started to invest seed investment in Beyond and Impossible and all of those. And that became actually, as Blue Horizon, became the biggest venture capital company in plant-based food around the world. Then he realized is that this was all great. And what was also true is that many of these companies were not set up for real global scale. And then he said, I want to do it from scratch in a global scaling the way. And so he came to me and said, with our combined capabilities and experience, this is the way to really start this. And so then we have the logic that we want to become, as I said, the preeminent global plant-based food business. And we have as a mission to make plant-based living the new norm by inspiring people to live kindly for humanity, for our home, and those who share it with us. And so humanity is obviously for generations to come, and the health part and the benefits of plant-based eating. Our home is the planet, and to give the planet voice. And then those who share it with us are the animals, and are basically those who are the most vulnerable. And so what we did with the first part of the fundraising is that we acquired 5 companies. A media company, which is livekindly.com, which is the voice of plant-based living. And then 4 different brands and companies, which is Like Meat in Germany, Oomph in Sweden, Fries in South Africa, and No Meat in the UK. And that is why we are called a Live Kindly collective. This is not just a company, but we wanted to voice that this is a movement, that this is actually a collective coming together. And what comes together is founders, entrepreneurs, and global leaders, because all of those who actually founded these brands and companies, which I've just mentioned, all of them are still and part of the company, but now as an integral part of the company. And we have combined that with global leaders. So we have 75 years of experience, expertise of plant-based food, combined with hundreds of years of people who have been all around the world, being part of the global food CPG industry. And so myself, but also our chief marketing officer, who has worked for decades for Unilever, of our chief finance officer, who actually was the CFO globally for Kraft Heinz, or the lady who runs China, who's been part of McCain and Cargill and Coke. And so really that has come together. So that's founders, entrepreneurs, and global leaders come together. And it is a portfolio of brands, which is global, regional, and local brands, which is started, but obviously has the intent to be able to really be significant going into the future. And as I said, it is a combination of a media company and a foods company. So that's the collective. And the last one is a collective because we create partnerships all across, from upstream all the way downstream to the consumers. And that is why it represents all the thoughts around what we want to do. And it is very much global. It is very much up and down the value chain, but it is very focused in terms of plant-based alternative meat.
Now, so I want to pick up on a few points that you mentioned throughout that discussion, because the reality is most of the people listening and viewing us now and watching this over the weeks to come are part of big organizations. And so they look at you, and in many ways, they will discount all the things that you're able to do because, yeah, he has no restrictions. He's the CEO and chairman and can get it done. And look at me and the company I'm in, and nothing's possible here. But actually, I already called you an entrepreneur before. You did this all those years in Unilever. So let's talk to that, because now you're in I want to talk a little bit about the organizational implications of what you are doing as a collective. If you hadn't moved and you were in Unilever and the other guy had moved, let's say Alan Jobe was the head of LIVEKINDLY, and now you're looking at him and you're saying, look, they're not merging it. They're not putting one stamp on it. They've got all these different business, lots of inefficiencies, but lots of energy. So what are the implications for big organizations and how they partner and how they structure perhaps even?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts on this question. I personally have always said within Unilever is that you can really be the internal disruptor. And, changing and creating new business models within a current system is something which is, of course, more difficult because you have the whole legacy business part of it. But definitely it is important is that you have leaders who create as internal disruptors into the organization. And this notion about, the joy to disrupt rather than to be disrupted, I also always thought it was a part of that. And so in the Unilever, when I was the president for Unilever North America, we created new ways of business models. And the world suddenly woke up when we acquired the Dollar Shave Club. And that was something which was very unique. It was direct to consumer, it was into shaving. There were many, many aspects of that. And I think it was very iconic because actually it said, we as Unilever, we made it very clear is that we were serious about direct to consumer, digital, data, new business models. And so I think it starts from the notion is that, it is really from within as much possible as you can do it from the outside. The second point, I think, this notion about, how you create truly total system change through transformation in collectives. And what you see is, for example, is that there is now set up a food collective, which talks about, how can we create by an end-to-end value chain, how you can create system change. And when we were in Unilever, we were a sizable business, but often what you realize is that despite your size, you still are not big enough to be able to shift total systems. And I think this notion about putting collectives together, whatever the way of that networks is, you can do that as big companies and as small companies, and the combination is even better. And once it comes together, you put the system in the room type of logic, and then you can really help to transform industries. And I think, when you look at it on some of the raw materials, you have seen that really happening. And I think it's our responsibility as leaders and as business people to be able to think about, how we can create a collective of companies who help to shift total systems.
So if you don't mind, I want to really dive in a little bit more there, because there's so many people that ask us for case studies and best practices around bringing new units into a big company and not killing them. Like the Kashi experience is one that everybody maybe not knows about. They were brought to the corporate headquarters while they before were based on the West Coast, and they literally almost died as a company, as a brand, and they reversed everything. How can a big organization, and I hope you don't mind me asking a few questions about your Unilever experience too, how can they maintain all the positives of the units that they're bringing in, the groups that they're bringing in, the tribes, without killing them? So learning from them, but also helping them without killing them. How do you do that?
Yeah, so no, I absolutely love still talking about the Unilever time. And, I hope actually that the Unilever team doesn't mind, but these are the things which I always said when I was inside of Unilever as well. So bear me if it's not relevant anymore. But the point being is when, the first acquisition which we did in Unilever North America was Talenti ice cream. And it was a very unique case because there were beautiful founders and they absolutely wanted to become part of Unilever, but they were so worried because actually they had created Belvedere vodka before and they sold it. And, when they were in the acquired company, they had a very, very bad experience of becoming part of a bigger group. And actually, when we put them as part of the Unilever business, they had one of the best times they had because they continued to feel as that they were actually the ones who were running the business, but using the big mothership for there where it was best. And when, seventh generation became part of the Unilever family, actually we had the same. We always talked about 100% separate and 100% integrated. And in the beginning, people said, well, but that's impossible. But actually, in the operations, it is possible. And so they stayed in Vermont, the culture and the community is a better word. The community really stayed very special there. And at the same time, it had the benefit in terms of global rollout and, the megaphone of their voice. Suddenly, they had a louder voice of that, what their mission was all about. And so that is by design. You can create and keep, and separate and integrated, and so that you get the benefits, the benefit of all.
So, if I can paraphrase a little bit, it sounds like you're almost giving the responsibility for deciding the degree of integration to the unit you're bringing in to say, use of us what you want to, what you think help, but we're not going to tell you what, because otherwise maybe I don't know, some kind of the killing of the cultures might take place. What about the founders? So now you have in Unilever, you bought 10, 15 companies, you got all these smart people, the Talenti owners, the Dollar Shave Club owner, and all these other founders around. Has the company, I once heard that the company actually brings them together to advise the overall company and sort of kick their butt. Is that what happens?
No, not at all to kick their butt, but it was true actually, is that we brought many of these founders who were still part of the business together and to get the learnings and say, what does it do and how it helps to create, the culture of founders mentality. And, if I look at what we do in Live Kindly Collective, and we keeping the founders in there, and we make sure is that whilst, we integrate the back end and you get the scale, because very often, founders, they have obviously the entrepreneurial part. It is, their personal money. There's all kinds of founder mentality benefits in there. But there's obviously very often also a capability issue around, how do you create scale and how do you set up infrastructure for that? And so if you combine that, actually, you get the benefit of all. So what we are putting in place is global IT infrastructures. We're putting the network of manufacturing in so that people can do what they love most. And that is the notion of building the brands and continuing to drive the mission and being the voice of that movement. And so that these are, more of networked organizations where actually you put structure, but a very, very loose part on top of that, which actually gets the benefit of both the founder's mentality and the benefit of the global scale into one system.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Actually reminds me, one of our IRG founders, the biggest and original founder is WPP, the agency network. And that's what Mark Reed talks a lot about, really taking a lot of the stuff away that founders of agencies, of creative hot shops don't want to be thinking about, probably aren't very good at, and actually just taking all that stuff off their plate and letting them get on with the transformation. Hey, you're now in a place where everybody clearly signs on for a vision of where the world is going. But many people listening are in organizations that are still cynical, despite the SEC changes and so forth, that actually purpose and performance somehow are competing. That if you live a purpose, or if you build a purposeful company, you're building in inefficiencies, you're going to be less competitive. And how do you deal with that cynical perspective and perhaps just resistant investor force as a leader that's trying to drive business for good?
Yeah, for us, there is zero trade-off in the system because purpose is at the core. Every plant-based chicken which we sell actually means is that we have a positive impact. If you look at it only in chicken, and many people talk about the cow and the beef, but actually even in chicken, which is the hardest comparison, the carbon footprint is 7 times better. The water is 5 times better of the total end-to-end value chain, and the land use 3 times better. So I think is that there are many actually economic systems where, relevance, growth, performance, and contribution as such are absolutely 100% linked. And I think it all comes back to, where is the consumer and the consumer demand. And you see is that we are blessed, in my view, with the best next generation to come. If you think about millennials of Gen Z, the consciousness of the world, the way they think, where digitization and transparency has become such an inherent part of life, and therefore, support into all this. We see this actually again in the plant-based food industry, where especially daughters between 12 and 17 years, they come home to their parents and say, I have changed my mind. I'm not going to eat animals anymore. And they are well educated there in the consciousness of where that is. It's very interesting to see how that is all the way from China to the US to South Africa to the UK and Germany and the likes. And so I think is that there are many businesses where you see is that this is 100% purpose at the core, and that these businesses are growing and are accelerating. We all know is that the cost of inaction starts to become higher than the cost of action. And so if we really talk about true cost in the system, there will be obviously a meat tax into the future. We've heard sugar tax for years and years and years. We all thought it would never come. Well, there it is in Mexico. And so this notion about true cost in the system, look at the EU Green Deal. And so therefore, the economic logic of the virtuous circles are absolutely happening, because suddenly you get a double whammy. Think about it in animal versus plant-based again. At the moment, lots of subsidies are there in terms of the dairy or in the meat industry. And actually, you will get a double whammy if that goes from subsidy to tax. On the other hand, if you do the other way around in plant-based, at the moment, there's not enough scale in there, so it's still a premium price. But at the same time, if the scale goes up and therefore cost goes down, also you get carbon credits, because the plants are putting carbon positive into the soil, which means is that you're getting a profit pool into this industry, which is all around, carbon tax. At the moment, $40 per ton will become $100 per ton into the future. So you get new profit pools. So I believe the bigger thing for everybody listening and thinking about, how and where next generation growth models, what is the next model in the system? Actually, you think about it from the foresight, what will happen to the industry, and it is always from the consumer first, but there is an economic system behind it which actually really drives the totality of performance and purpose being one and the same thing.
So you state that very clearly. You obviously led that mission now and in your previous role, but then there's lots of people around you that just aren't there yet. I want to talk a little bit about the actual leadership. I wasn't joking. I remember like yesterday, and that says something about how we age and some memories to stay. I remember we were Unilever colleagues, and I think you were building a totally new class of products, of margarines, the liquid frying, or anyway. But you had created a whole cult of people from production to marketing to supply chain and across. And everybody, there was a movement, and it was sensible. And I remember looking on with some slight jealousy at the time, thinking, wow, how does he get everybody so excited? But we have leaders in this call. Everyone here is a leader listening. What are your experiences? What are your best practices on how to create a movement? What does it take to get change in a big organization?
A very, very big question. And I think we need to be careful, especially on the bullshit ping pong and the buzzwords. But the point is that it all starts with character and people who have the courage to stand out. And I think is that, that is the most important thing. Once you are driven from your internal purpose and you're just convinced about it, then I have always thought, people can judge whatever they want, but this is just who I am. And I think is that, being authentic you and being that one individual in every circumstances, whether you're at home, whether you're with your friends, whether you are in wherever you're part of whatever community. So I think that's the most important part, is to stay very close to who you are, to your beliefs, and to your passion system. The second one is that I think is that being committed to each other's success. I just have heard that 20 years ago, and I think this is really where it is true, and that having the ability to be connected and make sure is that you have that at heart, and truly at heart. People feel that, and I think is that the responsibility which I have now. With already a company as from startup to scale up towards hopefully a multi-billion multinational. It's a big responsibility, because to many people, we go and we say, come and join. And so they resign and they come and join this movement. And we can only have that obviously if they say, I choose to be part of it. And it is amazing how many people actually believe And I think it is for three reasons. The first one is that they obviously believe in the business model and the purpose. The second one is that they believe that with me as a leader, is that they will just really go and really jump into the unknown. And the third one is that it is truly, the community of people which we are bringing together. And so out of the first sort of extended leadership team, we have 54 people, 27 women, 27 men, 18 nationalities. People look at that and say, wow, this is exciting. And so I think is that, when you peel it all down, of course, this is about one, it is about making a difference. It is about personal development, and it is about having fun, because don't forget, this notion about the joy of business and having fun needs to be a very important, at least for me, integral part of it.
Now, what's funny, I mean, listening to you talk, and I think, we share a heritage in Holland, and there's a Calvinistic quality to Holland, which you've mentioned, which is also people being oversensitive to whatever movements start, the almost natural reaction to say, whoa, let's take it easy. And I think we both enforce that. It's a significant part of the IRG program to actually talk about the leading change through an organization. But our program and the listeners and the viewers are mostly marketers. You are a marketer from day one, but now you're a CEO and have been an overall general manager for a long time. But I'd like you to look at the marketing role for a second. One, as businesses move towards a force of being a force for good, as the businesses are even considering that role, fighting the cynicism of either shareholders or the finance in this function, or whoever it is in the company that's resistant to the change, and then maybe even towards the outside stakeholders, what's the role of marketing in this moving towards being a force of good?
I think, to put the marketing person really with the right voice around the table, and calling it humanizing the growth, and making sure is that it represents actually the relevance in society, I think is absolutely fundamental and critical. It starts from the main role, obviously, as the head of marketing, is to make sure is that you are really consumer insight and foresight driven, and that you represent that voice into the organization. And so the thought around relevance, and therefore being part of growth, is where it all starts. And so, the ultimate part, what I think is the most difficult and the most important part, is to be able to get at the heart of your economic system, i.e. there where the value is being created, that you put purpose at the heart of your value creation. And so when we talk about fast-moving consumer goods, obviously, where the real money, where the real value is being created, is through brand equity, and their attributes. And so therefore, I believe is that the ultimate and most important role in the organization to be able to get purpose at the heart of your business system is through the marketing role, because you need to put it at the core of your brand positioning and your mix, so that indeed Ben & Jerry's is now not only the best tasting chunky ice cream, but also has attributes around really the elements of shared prosperity. And the moment that consumers are actually wanting to pay a premium for that, and having loyalty and pricing power in it, then you come to the heart of the economic system. And so therefore, ultimately, the marketing role, where this gets integrated into the proposition, is the single and most fundamental element of where, and this is the same as where purpose and performance, relevance and growth will sit.
All right, so that's a very clear business challenge, really, to the marketer. How many of the marketers, I mean, you are an observer of the marketing world, you used to be one of us. how many of the marketers that you know can actually play that role versus being part of the brand? We have our own metrics, gobbledygook world. Is the marketer
Yeah,
business?
yeah. I think when you go back to what I've just said, it comes with a prerequisite, is that you understand very deeply, where a consumer sentiment sits, and consumer trends and the relevance in society, and that it is not about today, but it is indeed about looking around the corner. And so I think it's actually the two elements which are the most important ones for marketers to think about, is this notion about seeing and looking around the corner, looking at the
Where you are in the world.
early elements, exactly,
Right.
looking at the early seeds where we already recognize is that these extreme consumers are actually today extreme, but they will become what the mass will become. And so I think to
Yeah.
spot that as the intuition,
Spotting the wave.
to spot that as an intuition into that, I think is the first very critical one. And then the second one is crafting brands, propositions, and integrate it in a way is that it sits in there. And that is always very difficult, because we've always learned as marketeers we need to be single-minded, and if you get too many dead messages, you dilute it. The reality is, if you overlay this with the digital revolution, you can segment it to that element where it actually for that specific individual consumer makes sense. So I think is that these elements are spotting the wave, the way you frame it. The second one is crafting, and the integrated brand and digitization is one and the same thing, to bring that together. Again, to make it specific for us, we have a brand which is called Like Meat in Germany. It's the market leader in plant-based chicken. And the reality there is that, it really helps consumers to enjoy. They love meat. And we don't say, don't do that. We actually hero that. We celebrate that. And we say, you can have all that in a plant-based way. And I think is that these elements, are now sitting in trends of society, and at the same time, really how you can make the brand positioning and the mix really sharpened into these individual elements of the attributes of the brand.
So I want to end with one or two questions about you, and perhaps um, you know we could be accused of only focusing on all the positive things, but life has major setbacks. I think, and I salute you for starting with that massive change moment in your life and the disappointment of being told you're not going to be the CEO. But I'd love to just indeed take that human aspect as a leader now and say, okay, you've achieved more than many. Um, there's lots of people listening in, and they're sitting at home behind a Zoom screen still, again, for the 50th time this week. The interaction has gone with other disciplines other than maybe indeed a Zoom meeting for an hour or not. Um, can you talk about some of the lessons that you've learned the hard way, and how they now actually help you as you build out your leadership role? What are the hard lessons learned?
I think I am an absolute optimist, and as Tutu always says, he is a prisoner of hope, and so I like to frame that as what I've learned, because much of what I've always realized is that what you really envision, that will become reality. But there's obviously a very big gap. Once that you envision it and are so passionate about it, is also is where the biggest pain will sit. And I think it's that this COVID has shown that once again, where you really understand that even when you put everything what you have into a space, that still things really can go into a complete different way, and that there are bigger elements at play. And I think is that this notion when you look at it in society, you see again, 500 million people going back into poverty. These are the elements where, if I look at, much of what we always say, we as business, and it is all about making progress. But that at the end, where is the progress? And I think that is one of the elements. To make it very personal there, if you look at my personal journey in South Africa, and what we have left behind there, and then what sometimes the reality is there. We have an adopted Zulu daughter, and you see, what an impact. She lives in a township in South Africa. You see what an impact it has there in terms of the stress into the system, the stress which that gets also in our personal life. These things are suddenly a new reality. And I personally, I get lots of energy from people, and I hope to give some energy to people. And the frustrating part of what we are doing now in this Zoom part, and the eagerness to be able to move on and create the next part, I think is that we are all very much stressed and in pain on that. I personally believe is that the emotional bank account is getting down and down on relationships. And so that means is that it will become even more difficult. And, we see that in building our business. On the 9th and 10th of March, we were actually with 100 people in New York City from all around the world. Can you imagine? And on the 12th of March, the world went into a lockdown. And the notion about, how and where we have the difficulty to build a community, to build relationships in there. I've never seen in my life, I've never seen our CFO physically in my life, or our chief HR officer. By the way, she came into the business and has gone out of the business already. And I've never seen her in my life. And these are things which, is very, very much where this phase needs to end, because, we really need to turn the page and create the next chapter, taking the learnings and the positive out of it. But we really need to quickly move on, because it is obviously in pain. And when you start up a small business, and the factory suddenly can't run because of COVID, and it stops completely, and you have a little business, it was actually very close of these moments that it actually just stops your entire startup. And so these are real moments of feeling vulnerable into a system which you always have thought about, is that you can, whenever you put your talents and passion in, is that you can create it. But there are very vulnerable feeling and vulnerable moments in there.
Yeah, we're not in different. We're not in the same place over the world at the moment. This is something I recognize, and is leading to frustrations also within organizations. Kees, we could probably keep going for 3 hours. There's questions for at least another 2. Most of them are zooming in on the industry that you've entered, and of course, my goal was not that, but was really to talk about leadership lessons. I want to end in a new way that I've started doing. That is really your recommendation. Who else should these marketers and other growth leaders that are listening hear from? Who do you recommend for a Humanized Series conversation?
Yeah, there was a moment is that I stood up at a extended leadership team meeting in New York for the Unilever leadership team. And I said, I don't know whether I am still the right person to lead this organization, because my capabilities are a little bit, in the past. And I don't know whether my capabilities are the right capabilities to lead this organization forward. And I recognized that myself. And what I did is I really went into, rejuvenation and learn and unlearn. And one of the things what we did is to basically to acquire Dollar Shave Club. I already said that. And from Michael Dubin, I've learned so many things. And so I would love to introduce you to Michael Dubin, the founder and CEO of Dollar Shave Club. He actually just stepped down after I think 4.5 years being in Dollar Shave Club as part of Unilever. So absolutely great. And I think is that he would be fantastic in terms of marketing, in terms of business models, in terms of leadership, to be able to have him join him here at the IRG. And so I will introduce you to him, and I hope is that people will enjoy it and learn as much from him as I have done.
Now, Kees, and then from everybody here, as we've learned from you. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it, and I know the audience really, really appreciates it. There's lots of comments there, lots of questions for the future, but our time's run out. Kees Kruythoff, have a great weekend and a big thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you as always, Mark. Thanks for what you are doing.
Take care. Bye-bye.